The Korean War was just a tiny conflict in Northeast Asia that was part of a bigger conflict known as the Cold War. It started shortly after World War II had ended when the USSR and the United States both started developing nuclear weapons. The USSR wanted North Korea to convert to communism. The US, fearing the domino effect, supported South Korea. On June 25, 1950, North Korea invaded South Korea. This would be the beginning of fighting that lasts even till this day. Jesse L. Brown was born in the town of Hattiesburg, Mississippi on October 13, 1926, to Julia Lindsay Brown and John Brown. He had 4 brothers, Marvin, William, Fletcher, and Laura, and one sister named Johnny. At age 6, Jesse's father took him to his first air show. This is where Jesse gained an interest in flying. Afterwards, he would frequently visit a nearby dirt airfield, where he was constantly chased away by a local mechanic. At age 13, he got a job as a paperboy at the Pittsburgh Courier, a primarily African-American newspaper. When reading the newspaper, he would read stories about African-American pilots at the time, such as C. Alfred Anderson, Eugene Jacques Bullard, and Bessie Coleman. His love for flying was so extreme that in 1937, he wrote a letter to Franklin D. Roosevelt in which he complained about African-Americans not being allowed in the Army Air Corps. The White House responded by simply saying they appreciated the viewpoint. In 1939, Jesse's parents sent him to live with his aunt because the schools were higher quality where she lived. Jesse attended the segregated Eureka High School, where he would meet his future wife, Daisy Pearl Nix. Jesse graduated high school in 1944 and was one of 7 African-American students from Eureka High School to do so. Afterwards, he attended Ohio State University. In order to get money for college, Jesse borrowed tables in a saloon for white soldiers where he was constantly harassed by patrons. Nonetheless, he earned the $600 needed to pay for college. Jesse applied several times for the aviation program at Ohio State, but was turned down every time due to his race. During his second year at college, Jesse found out about the V-5 Aviation Cadet Training Program started up by the U.S. Navy. The course was only open to white and mixed colleges, which included Brown's College. This would be Jesse's replacement for Ohio State's aviation program. Despite resistance from the recruiter, he passed the entrance exam. Brown enlisted in the Naval Reserve on July 8, 1946. He became a seaman apprentice and was admitted to the aviation program despite the odds. On March 15, 1947, Jesse reported to Glenview Naval Air Station in Glenview, Illinois for Naval Flight Officer training. On April 15, he became a midshipman, becoming the only African American in the program. He was at first fearful of the other students, but found out they were nicer to him than the African American cooks and janitors on base, who were possibly jealous of his pilot status. He was then transferred to 2 more bases for training: Ottumwa Naval Air Station in Ottumwa, Iowa, and Pensacola Naval Air Station in Pensacola, Florida. It was while in Pensacola that he married Daisy. The union had to be held in secret because naval cadets were not allowed to marry until after their graduation, and anyone caught would be kicked out of the program. Jesse earned his Naval Aviation Badge on October 21, 1948, which appeared in Life magazine. The author of the article, Theodore Taylor, reportedly wrote that Brown had broken the color barrier which had been long-standing in preventing blacks in naval aviation. On April 26, 1949, Jesse was commissioned as an ensign in the U.S. Navy. Brown himself said that as soon as he became an officer, all forms of racial harassment soon ended. In December of that year, his daughter, Pamela Elise Brown, was born. He was also assigned to Fighter Squadron 32 aboard the USS Aleti, where he would meet his friend, Thomas J. Hudner, Jr. Hudner couldn't be more different from Brown. He was born into a wealthy family on August 31, 1924. He was due to attend Harvard before enrolling in the Navy shortly after the Pearl Harbor attacks, but the resulting war ended before he finished basic training. The first time that Hudner and Brown met was a rather brief confrontation. Hudner reached out his hand and Brown shook it. From that point onward, they became good friends. In an interview, Hudner recalled that Brown would write a letter to his wife every day. He also stated that one time, a group of white pilots asked Brown if he wanted to join them in a bar. The bar owner refused to let Brown in due to the color of his skin, so the pilots refused to go in without Brown. Brown offered to take them to a colored bar, but they were stopped by a different bar owner because Brown's fellow pilots were white, so he in turn didn't go in with them. He was just one of the guys, Hudner said. On the night of June 25, 1950, all hell broke loose. The North Korean army invaded South Korea, starting the Korean War. By the time the USS Leyte had arrived, the United Nations forces had begun to push the North Koreans back to the Chinese border. Fearing an invasion if the North Koreans happened to lose the war, the Chinese military joined North Korea sometime in late November 1950. This wound up trapping a group of 15,000 U.S. troops near the Chosun Reservoir in what is now Changjin County, North Korea. Brown and Hudner's mission was to provide air cover while the troops evacuated by means of the sea. On December 4th, 1950, Jesse and Thomas, along with 4 other fighter pilots of VF-32 based off the USS Leyte, were flying near the Chosun Reservoir. The plane the men were flying was the Vought F-4U Corsair. It had a reputation for being fun to fly, but hard to control. At one point during the fight, one of the other pilots, or according to some reports, Brown himself, reported that Brown was trailing something. Brown reported that he was losing fuel after apparently being shot by small arms fire. It was determined that he couldn't make it back to the USS Leyte, so Brown was forced to make a crash landing. The plane was bent just after the canopy and smoke was coming from the engine. Fearing that a fire could break out or that he could be captured by Chinese forces that could be in the area, Hudner made the difficult decision to crash land his own plane in an attempt to save his friend. It was soon realized that Brown was pinned by a control stick of the plane and that he was stuck. Hudner tried several times to free his friend, but to no avail. By the time a rescue helicopter finally arrived, Brown was slipping in and out of consciousness due to the cold. The helicopter pilot and Hudner tried for 45 minutes to free Brown with an axe. At one point, Jesse asked for his legs to be amputated. This was considered briefly, but the team never fulfilled the request. During the rescue attempt, Brown told Hudner, "If anything happens to me, tell Daisy how much I love her." The helicopter pilot told Hudner that they could not fly at night, so they had to leave. By the time they left, Brown is believed to have died. 2 days later, U.S. Navy pilots dropped napalm on the crash site to prevent the aircraft and Brown's body from falling into enemy hands. They recited the Lord's Prayer over the radio as they watched Brown's body be consumed by the flames. Brown is considered the first African-American naval pilot lost to enemy action and the first African-American pilot to lose his life in unified armed forces in the United States. For his heroic actions, Hudner was awarded the Medal of Honor by President Harry S. Truman. Present at the ceremony was Daisy Brown, now Jesse's widow. It was at that ceremony that Hudner was able to tell her Jesse's last words. According to Hudner, he stayed in close contact with Daisy for more than 50 years after that encounter. On February 17, 1973, days before Hudner retired from the Navy, the U.S. Navy commissioned the Knox-class frigate USS Jesse L. Brown. In attendance of the commission was Daisy, who had remarried, Pamela, and Hudner, who spoke at the commission ceremony. The ship was decommissioned on July 27, 1994, and it was sold to the Egyptian Navy. She is currently serving as the Damiat. Hudner was especially important due to the fact that racial injustice was still common during this time, but Hudner didn't care what race Jesse was. They were still good friends. Up until his death in 2017, Hudner tried his best to bring Brown's body home, but was denied by North Korean authorities each time. On May 7, 2012, Secretary of the Navy, Ray Mabus, announced the name of the new Arleigh Burke-class destroyer that would be named after Hudner. The USS Thomas Hudner's keel was laid down on November 16, 2015. She was christened on April 1, 2017, and launched 3 weeks later. The USS Thomas Hudner was officially commissioned on December 1, 2018, and is still in service to this day. Thomas Hudner lived the rest of his days in Concord, Massachusetts with his wife, Georgia Smith. It was in their home where he would pass away on November 13, 2017. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery on April 4, 2018, with full military honors. This ceremony was attended by Joseph Dunford and the Joint Chiefs of Staff. John Kelvin Koelsch was born on December 22, 1923. His father, Henry Koelsch, was from New York City, while his wife, Buella Koelsch, was from Minnesota. While John is an American citizen, he was born in London, England, as his father was an international banker and had family in London. John had two brothers, Peter, born in Siberia, and Philip, also born in England. In his adult life, John served in the Royal Air Force and saw action during the Blitz. After this, he joined the U.S. Naval Reserves in 1942, which led to him seeing action in the Pacific Theater. He spent the next few years serving at naval air stations in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and Norfolk, Virginia. During his time in the Pacific War, John would become an accomplished torpedo bomber pilot and was promoted to lieutenant junior grade on August 1, 1946. As soon as the Korean War broke out, John joined Helicopter Squadron 1 at Miramar, California. He joined the USS Princeton as an officer in charge of helicopter detachment for pilot rescue duty off Eastern Korea. John served on Princeton until June 1951 when he was transferred to Helicopter Squadron 2 for pilot rescue duty off Wonsan, Korea, which was then under naval blockade. John went on many rescue missions, but his final mission began on July 3, 1951. He responded to a distress call from Marine aviator Captain James V. Wilkins, whose F-4U Corsair had been hit by enemy fire during an armed reconnaissance mission about 35 miles southwest of Wonsan. Although Wilkins had bailed out, he had burns on his legs. Despite approaching darkness, worsening weather, and enemy ground fire, Koelsch located the downed aviator in the Anbian Valley and began his pickup alongside crewman George M. Neal. Thick fog prevented air cover from protecting the unarmed HO-3S helicopter, and intense enemy fire downed the craft as Neal hoisted the injured Wilkins towards the helicopter. Koelsch, Neal, and Wilkins survived the crash. They hid from enemies in the mountains for 3 days before slowly walking towards the coast. After 6 days, they reached a coastal village and were captured there the next day. While in captivity, Koelsch was beaten and abused by his captors, but he refused to submit to interrogation. This inspired Neal and Wilkins to follow suit. John Kelvin Koelsch died as a prisoner of war on October 16, 1951, due to malnutrition and dysentery. On July 27, 1953, North Korea, China, and the United Nations agreed to a ceasefire. This eventually led to the release of prisoners of war in North Korea, including the release of Wilkins and Neal on September 5, 1953. On August 3, 1955, Koelsch was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions in Korea. This would make him the first helicopter pilot to do so. He is buried at Arlington National Cemetery in Arlington, Virginia. His grave is numbered 1123 RH and can be found in Section 30. The events of World War II showed the U.S. Army that they needed more reliable treatment centers for wounded soldiers. The solution? The Mobile Army Surgical Hospital Unit, or better known as MASH. MASH was first envisioned in 1946 by multiple surgical consultants. The concept was that in the golden hour, which is the first hour of someone getting hurt, is the most critical time period to save a life. MASH was also important in developing triage, basically determining how severe the injury is. Green means that wounds or injuries aren't completely disabling. Yellow means not in immediate danger but requires medical care. Red means requires immediate treatment in order to survive, and black means deceased or so severely wounded that there's no hope for survival. This same system is still used by emergency rooms across the world to this day. A new tool that also helped MASH units was the helicopter. The most common helicopter used at MASH units was the H-13 Sioux, which could carry up to 2 wounded on special stretchers that were attached to each side of the skids. The MASH unit's first conflict was the Korean War. According to some estimates, the percentage rate of those who died decreased from 4% to 2.5% in Korea thanks to MASH. On top of that, a soldier who made it to a MASH unit alive was 97% more likely to survive their injuries than those who would have been treated at a field hospital. However, the golden age of the MASH units would end after the Korean War. MASH units saw very little action in the Vietnam War. In fact, only one MASH unit, the 2nd MASH unit, served in Vietnam only from October 1966 to July 1967. Vietnam saw a switch from MASH to MUST. Injuries in the Vietnam War were different from the ones seen in the Korean War, forcing MUST units to adapt accordingly. After Vietnam, MASH units received some revived relevance in the Gulf War and Operation Iraq Freedom. However, MASH units would be replaced around the end of the 20th century by combat support hospitals, which were in turn replaced by modular units, simply called field hospitals, starting in November 2017. The last MASH unit in Korea was deactivated in 1997. In attendance was Larry Linville and David Ogden Steers, actors from the MASH television series. The last MASH unit in the world was deactivated on October 16, 2006, when it was converted to a combat support hospital. One of the surgeons working in MASH units was one Heister Richard Hornberger Jr. After the war, Hornberger began writing a novel about his experiences in the Korean War. The novel took 11 years to finish, with its publication in 1968. The book would be titled MASH, a novel about 3 army doctors, published under the pseudonym Richard Hooker. The book was a success and later led to a film adaptation in 1970 and a television show starting in 1972. Many changes were made from real-life MASH units in the film and TV show. For example, MASH units in the film and show were smaller than in real life. 4 doctors, 1 neurosurgeon, 10 nurses, and 50 to 7 enlisted MASH personnel worked for the TV show and movie, compared to the real 8076, which included 10 medical officers, 12 nursing officers, and 89 enlisted personnel. The MASH television series started airing around the time the Vietnam War ended. Because of this, the show's producers wanted to show that not everyone made it home in one piece, and some didn't make it home at all, as is the case of Colonel Henry Blake. In the episode I Be Seeing Ya Henry, his plane is shot down and he dies. The episode was controversial, as many viewers were upset that such a serious death took place in what was otherwise a comedy show. Some even vowed to never watch the show again. However, the show's series finale remains the most watched TV show series finale ever recorded in American history. The time of MASH units in the field may have come to an end, but their legacy lives on thanks to the iconic television series. The Korean Armistice Agreement was signed on July 27, 1953. It was designed to ensure a complete cessation of hostilities and of all acts of armed force in Korea until a final peaceful settlement is achieved. South Korea refused to sign, as President Syngman Rhee refused to accept his failure to unify Korea by force. China pulled out of the armistice in 1994. With the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, China was left as North Korea's only ally. China's decision was seen as an effort to support their allies. The United States signed the armistice on behalf of the United Nations, and so has North Korea. Despite this, there have been mishaps between the two nations, such as the Pueblo incident in 1968, where an American research vessel was captured by North Korea and her crew was imprisoned and tortured. There was also the EC-121 shoot-down incident in 1969, where an American EC-121 was shot down by 2 North Korean MiG-21s and her 31-man crew was killed. And finally, there was the Korean Axe murder incident. The Korean Axe murder incident took place on August 18, 1976 in Panmunjom, Korea. A team of South Koreans and Americans stationed at United Nations Command Checkpoint 3 were sent to prune a nearby tree. This was done because the tree in question blocked an observation post, OP number 5, from view. In the team was Captain Arthur Boniface, a 33-year-old from Nebraska. The tree they were sent to prune was actually quite popular in the area, as it was planted by former North Korean leader Kim Il-sung himself. After pruning of the tree began, the UNC crew was approached by 15 North Korean KPA soldiers led by Lieutenant Pak Chol. Pak demanded the UNC crew stop cutting down the tree, but Boniface told them to continue and ignored the North Koreans. Pak sent a soldier across a nearby bridge, the Bridge of No Return, to get back up. He eventually came back with 20 more North Koreans armed with crowbars and clubs. Pak once again demanded the UNC stop, and once again, Boniface ignored them. Pak then yelled, "Kill the bastards!" The KPA soldiers attacked the UNC crew, some using axes as weapons. Boniface was pushed to the ground by Pak and then beaten to death by at least 5 North Koreans. The fight lasted about half a minute before the UNC team dispersed. The North Koreans placed Boniface's body in one of their trucks. After the incident, the North Koreans spun a narrative of KPA soldiers acting in self-defense against aggressive Americans. The UNC responded with Operation Paul Bunyan, which would cut down the tree with the aid of overwhelming force. The operation took place on August 21st, 3 days after the incident. 2 teams of engineers got to work cutting down the tree with a task force of 64 men protecting them. While a team of 150 to 200 armed North Koreans arrived, they did nothing but watch. The tree was down in 42 minutes. The incident had led to increased tension in the area, but thankfully didn't lead to a war like many had feared. The UNC demanded that North Korea punish those involved and make adequate reparations for the families of those killed and injured. North Korea responded the same day Operation Bunyan was carried out. It was a good thing that no big incident occurred at Panmunjom for a long period. However, it is regretful that an incident occurred in the joint security area. An effort must be made so that such incidents may not occur in the future. For this purpose, both sides should make efforts. We urge your side to prevent the provocation. Our side will never provoke first, but take self-defensive measures only when provocation occurs. This is our consistent stand. While the reply didn't necessarily meet the UNC's requirements, it was seen as a step in the right direction, as this was the first time since the signing of the armistice in 1953 that North Korea took responsibility for violence in the demilitarized zone. All that was left of the tree after Operation Paul Bunyan was a stump, which was cut down in 1987. Checkpoint number 3 ceased use in the mid-1980s, and an axe that was supposedly used in the incident is now on display in the North Korea Museum. The Korean War set a new precedent for the Cold War, as the United States and Soviet Union learned they could use proxy wars to fight each other, later seen again with the Vietnam War. North and South Korea suffered economic and infrastructural damage from the conflict. The United States aided South Korea in reconstruction, while China and the Soviet Union aided North Korea. The United States spent an estimated $15 billion on the war. That's about $145 billion in today's money. U.S. military personnel who served in the war were awarded the Korean Service Medal. However, many Korean War veterans feel the war is often neglected compared to other wars, such as both World Wars, for example. The Korean War Veterans Memorial was built in an attempt to address this problem, but regardless, the Korean War is sometimes referred to as the Forgotten War, or the Unknown War. There's still a U.S. presence in Korea to this day thanks to the armistice. Approximately 3 million people died in the Korean War. North Korea suffered roughly 2,506,000 casualties, South Korea 1,646,000, China 1,316,000, the United States 139,852, and United Nations forces suffered 14,880 total casualties. Relations between America and North Korea remain turbulent to this day, now with a new player in the field, nuclear weapons. North Korea detonated their first atom bomb on October 9, 2006. This would lead to more nuclear tests from North Korea, with the most recent and most powerful bomb being detonated in 2017. On June 12, 2018, former President Donald Trump met with Kim Jong-un in Singapore. During the meeting, the two leaders shook hands and signed a statement. Of the meeting, Kim Jong-un said, "We had a historic meeting and decided to leave the past behind." Donald Trump was very proud of what took place today. I think our whole relationship with North Korea and the Korean Peninsula is going to be a very much different situation than it has in the past. The two leaders held a second meeting on February 27, 2019 in Vietnam. They talked for 2 days, however, an agreement was not reached. Trump commented on the meeting, stating they were willing to de-nuke a large portion of the areas that we wanted, but we couldn't give up all the sanctions for that. A few more meetings were held in the Trump administration, but on June 12, 2020, the North Korean Minister of Foreign Affairs stated that the efforts the past 2 years were for political achievements without returns for North Korea. In early 2021, the Biden administration reached out to North Korea but was ignored. On March 18th that year, Cho Sun-hui, North Korean First Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs, said that no dialogue would be possible until the United States rolled back its hostile policy towards North Korea and both parties were able to exchange words on an equal basis. The Korean War status as forgotten is unfortunate, as roughly 3 million individuals lost their lives in the 4-year conflict. Every one of those 3 million people had friends and family who loved them. They had hopes, dreams, fears, and anxieties. They lived on the same soil, breathed the same air, and bled the same blood as all of us. They were men, children, and women, and regardless of what side of the conflict they fell on, they were human. It's important not to forget the lives of those who were lost, because no one deserves to be forgotten.